Rome fought many wars in its history, each with its own fascinating story. However, some of these end up forgotten, often when their events prove less than flattering to the Romans. In particular, the Numidian campaign of the late 2nd century BC would become infamous for not only being Rome's most corrupt war, but also featuring one of its most cunning foes whose schemes would precipitate one of the most significant reforms of the Roman military. This is the Jugurthine War. You can also build your own team of feared conquerors by picking from more than 650 champions through our sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends, available on mobile and PC. While I was apprehensive at first, I've actually had quite a lot of fun playing the game for the past few months, and find it to be an easy and addictive way to scratch my itch when it comes to dungeon diving, boss fights, and arena battles. The game offers a ton of ways to play, with my top 2 champions being Herndig, the dwarf who gets faster and stronger with each kill, as well as the Royal Guard, for his deadly AoE attacks, which scale based on enemy health and is excellent for clearing waves and tough bosses. In summary, what makes Raid great are the regular updates, the adrenaline-fueled fights, the intuitive gameplay, and the diverse dungeons. But that's not all. Raid is celebrating its 4th anniversary with a personalized recap of your Raid stats, dedicated offers, free gifts, promo codes, and a brand new Fusion event where you can get your hands on anniversary-themed legendary champions. Use the promo code 4YearsRaid to get 4 legendary skill tomes, 4 energy refills, 400 energy, and 400,000 silver. In addition, Amazon Prime members who just got Gembo will soon get another drop with some powerful Savage gear, available until March 30th. There's never been a better time to get started, so use my link or scan the QR code right here and get a free starter pack with this cool in-game loot. Enjoy! To fully understand the Jugurthine War, we must first wind the clock back to the rise of Numidia and explore how the Romans became involved in North Africa. The Numidians were one of the oldest peoples residing in North Africa, with a history long predating the arrival of the more civilized powers such as Carthage. They were not, however, a united people, being divided into many tribes of varying degrees of size and strength. The Numidians would rise to fame fighting as auxiliaries and mercenaries in the armies of Carthage, most notably during the first 2 Punic Wars with Rome. It was during these great conflicts that the Romans and Numidians also came into contact for the first time, initially as enemies, but over time, increasingly as allies as well. By the time of the Second Punic War, the tribes had largely coalesced into 2 rival kingdoms, the Massili and the Massinissa. By the end of the conflict, the Romans were able to turn the tables and gained the support of the Numidians, who significantly helped them defeat Carthage at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. This in turn led to Numidia for the first time being united under a single ruler, King Massinissa, a prince of the Massili and proven ally of the Romans. Under Massinissa's rule, Numidian power grew considerably, and her ties to Rome remained close. He ruled for over 50 years until he died in 148 BC, a mere 2 years before Rome destroyed Carthage for good in the Third Punic War and created a new province in Africa around the old Carthaginian heartland. Numidia was then ruled by Massinissa's son, Micipsa, who also proved to be an effective and long-lasting ruler. Micipsa continued his father's legacy for Numidia, which had in many parts become more developed through the growth of settled agriculture and urbanization, as well as extensive trade. All the while, Numidia's alliance with Rome remained strong, with the African kingdom loyally sending significant amounts of grain, war elephants, and troops to support Rome's numerous wars when needed. Few would have likely even considered the possibility that conflict could arise between the two. But following the death of Micipsa in 118 BC, trouble rapidly began to brew in the heartland of Numidia. Micipsa had 2 sons, Adherbal and Hypsal, who were to jointly rule Numidia upon his death. But there was another unforeseen variable in this succession plan, a prince by the name of Jugurtha. Little is known of Jugurtha's early life. He was technically the son of Micipsa's brother, Mastanaba, and thus linked to the Numidian royal family, but scandalously, his mother was a prostitute, which led to Micipsa leaving Jugurtha on the figurative wayside early on. Despite these challenges, Jugurtha would increasingly thrive in Numidia. According to the Roman historian Sallust, he eschewed the luxuries that his royal status would normally grant him in favor of partaking in traditional Numidian pursuits, evidently side by side with the common people, such as horse riding, javelin throwing, and sprinting competitions. Jugurtha also often went hunting, with his greatest prize being a lion. His evidently humble character also gained him much renown, since he rarely spoke of himself at all, despite his fame and impressive achievements. Micipsa was initially pleased with Jugurtha, thinking that his prestige would somehow transfer to himself and his kingdom. But as the years went by and the king became older, Micipsa's attitude shifted. Not only was Jugurtha becoming only more popular, but his prestige had eclipsed that of the king's own sons and preferred heirs, and Micipsa began to fear that the people would look increasingly to Jugurtha as his successor over his children. There were even fears that Jugurtha would begin fomenting rebellion. Micipsa did not dare oppose Jugurtha openly, but he saw an opportunity to discreetly get rid of him in 134 BC. At the time, Rome was involved in a brutal war in Hispania with the Numantines, and they were now requesting fresh auxiliaries from Numidia. Micipsa correctly predicted that the bold and energetic Jugurtha would be eager to get involved in the conflict, and he placed him in command of the Numidian contingent sent to support the Romans, who were under the command of the famous Scipio Aemilianus, conqueror of Carthage. Micipsa hoped that the dangerous conflict would eliminate the troublesome prince, but this plan backfired quite spectacularly. Jugurtha rapidly gained the respect of the Romans he fought beside, and formed close ties with many of their nobles, including Scipio himself. Jugurtha became famous for his personal bravery and sound strategic mind, a reputation which also spread to the Numantines themselves. By the time that the Numidine War was won in 133 BC, Jugurtha was not only alive, but far more influential than he had ever been before, with much of the Roman aristocracy considering him the ideal candidate for the throne of Numidia. Scipio himself was impressed by Jugurtha, and according to Sallust, made a speech before his army praising his conduct, as well as writing a letter to Micipsa, commending him. Reportedly, Scipio also cautioned Jugurtha against cultivating his friendship with Rome through private connections and money, as apparently he'd already been doing, telling the prince that as long as he held true to his good character, then kingship would naturally be his. If this is true, then Scipio's advice would prove cruelly poetic in the coming years. When Jugurtha returned to Numidia, he did so as a hero, and Micipsa now felt more concerned than ever before, but realized there was little he could do except support him. In 121 BC, Jugurtha was also adopted by Micipsa, much to the disdain of his youngest son, Hiempsal, who despised his new adoptive brother due to his mother's low status. When Micipsa died in 118 BC, he left the kingdom to be jointly ruled by Jugurtha and his sons, perhaps hoping that they could find some way to coexist. If so, then Micipsa would have been greatly disappointed by what came next. Jugurtha's joint rule with Adherbal and Hiempsal was tense, beginning with the very first meeting of the trio as kings, when they were to decide how Numidia and the royal treasury were to be divided between them. Here, Jugurtha and Hiempsal fell into an argument over invalidating the decisions of Micipsa due to the former king's deteriorating mental health in his final years, where Hiempsal also commented on Jugurtha's recent elevation to royalty. This seems to have greatly insulted Jugurtha, perhaps because by emphasizing his adoption, Hiempsal may have been implying that his brother was not true royalty, which only fed the existing feud between the two men. So gravely insulted was Jugurtha that he began to plot to have his brother assassinated as soon as the meeting ended. In an incredible stroke of luck, Hiempsal's residence was located in the town of Thermida, which was governed by one of Jugurtha's closest supporters. Thus, in the dead of night, Jugurtha sent a band of soldiers into Hiempsal's household, who began to search for the king. Hiempsal was discovered hiding in the hut of one of his servants, wherein the terrified king of Numidia was ignominiously murdered. As proof of the deed, Jugurtha's thugs decapitated Hiempsal and brought him his head. However, even though this operation had been conducted under the cover of night, Jugurtha's actions against Hiempsal were far from subtle, and news of the brutal attack in Thermida rapidly spread. Adherbal and his own supporters were understandably worried, and he sent word to Rome describing Jugurtha's actions, and doubtless hoping that they would intervene to support him. Civil war now erupted, which saw Jugurtha's previous popularity with the Numidian people fracture, as most turned against him. This increased Adherbal's confidence, who decided to meet Jugurtha in open battle, where he hoped his superior numbers would overwhelm him. Jugurtha, however, had the support of the more experienced and skilled fighters, and was himself a capable general, and Adherbal was decisively defeated. The king was forced to flee Numidia in exile, first to the Roman province in Africa, and from there to Rome itself. Jugurtha was now effectively the king of all of Numidia, and had achieved his greatest ambition within just a single year. Yet he could not afford to rest on his laurels, and well understood the threat that Rome could pose to his regime if they chose to support Adherbal. Thus, Jugurtha deployed one of his most powerful tools against Rome in order to delay its involvement: mass bribery. A delegation was put together and sent to Rome loaded with large sums of money and gifts for Jugurtha's existing supporters, as well as to bribe any other agreeable members of the aristocracy. This underhanded plan quickly bore fruit, and several Roman officials were convinced to look the other way as Jugurtha usurped his brother's position or otherwise delay any Roman involvement. Eventually, both Adherbal and Jugurtha's supporters were given an audience in the Senate to explain their positions. There were some senators who had resisted the temptation of Jugurtha's gold and argued for supporting Adherbal and avenging his brother, most prominent among them being a certain Aemilius Scaurus. However, Jugurtha's bribery campaign had proven so effective that he had enough members of the Roman aristocracy in his pocket to convince the Senate to rule in his favor. Numidia was to be divided between Jugurtha and Adherbal, but although the Senate agreed that the kingdom should be divided evenly between the two, Jugurtha's half contained the bulk of Numidia's resources. At this point, a delegation led by the distinguished senator Lucius Opimius was sent to personally ratify the decree with Jugurtha. He was reportedly quickly bribed by the king to be more amenable to his wishes, along with all but a few members of the Roman delegation. Jugurtha's scheming had paid off, literally, far beyond even his own expectations, and unsurprisingly instilled in him a deep belief that he could operate with impunity in Numidia if he had enough money for bribes in Rome. Thus, as soon as Opimius departed, Jugurtha drew up plans to annex Adherbal's kingdom. He began by launching small-scale raids into his territory, aiming to provoke his brother into attacking him in force. For a number of years, this pattern continued, until in 112 BC, Adherbal could no longer take the pressure and began to gather an army, which led to Jugurtha immediately doing the same. The two armies met near the city of Cirta, where Jugurtha once again crushed Adherbal by launching a nighttime assault on his camp. Adherbal escaped with a few cavalrymen into the safety of Cirta's walls, which was then besieged by Jugurtha. Before the fighting had begun, Adherbal had once again sent a delegation to Rome explaining the situation. Unfortunately for him, Jugurtha was well aware of this fact, and when a Roman delegation of 3 senators arrived to investigate, they were confronted by the king. Jugurtha did not even need to resort to bribery, as the Roman representatives were easily convinced to simply accept his version of events, returning to Italy without ever speaking to Adherbal. Jugurtha then tightened his siege of Cirta, constructing a ditch, siege towers, and other fortifications around the city to hem in the enemy, likely inspired by his experience with the Roman military in Numantia. The city at first held out against Jugurtha's assault, primarily thanks to the presence of a large number of Roman and Italian settlers who were now chiefly responsible for defending the walls. Yet Adherbal grew increasingly desperate and managed to slip a message past Jugurtha's lines by sending 2 of his swiftest soldiers to deliver a message to Rome. When his letter was read aloud to the Senate, some were eager to send an army to crush Jugurtha and end support for him altogether. But once again, the Numidian king's contacts amongst the aristocracy protected him from this punishing decree. Instead, yet another delegation was put together and sent to Africa, headed by the prominent senator Marcus Scaurus, as well as other senior members of the nobility. While no army accompanied them, the arrival of many experienced senators to confront him was enough to make Jugurtha nervous. Was the attention of these more seasoned men with stronger character a prelude to a harsher Roman response? He would find out shortly. Scaurus sent a new letter to the king, demanding that he end the siege of Cirta and also come meet him in Utica. Jugurtha delayed meeting the senators as long as possible, hoping to take Cirta before then, but eventually he was forced to depart the siege to confront Scaurus. What words or gold was exchanged is unknown. In the end, however, the meeting between Jugurtha and the senators came to nothing, and both the king and the Roman delegation parted ways without anything being resolved. Nevertheless, This indecisive result ended up favoring Jugurtha, as it now seemed apparent that no help was coming for Adherbal, who remained under siege at Cirta. News of this eventually found its way to the beleaguered city regarding the departure of Scaurus' delegation. Adherbal was then approached by the Roman and Italian settlers within Cirta, who advised him to surrender, evidently assuming that Jugurtha would not be so brash as to harm him, perhaps in part due to the fact that the Senate had so recently departed and in the past supported Adherbal. As for the settlers themselves, they assumed that their own status as citizens of the Republic would guarantee their safety and return to Rome. Reluctantly, Adherbal capitulated, only to have his worst fears vindicated. Jugurtha's first act was to seize the city, torture Adherbal, and then have him executed, followed in short order by the Roman and Italian inhabitants of the city, who only a short while ago had advocated for the surrender that had now led to their deaths, as well as those of Cirta's entire adult Numidian population. Jugurtha was now apparently ascendant and untouchable. His political rivals in Numidia were dead, and the entirety of the kingdom was once again in his grasp, while his greatest potential rival in Rome was bogged down by corruption. However, as the ambitious would-be king of Numidia would soon discover, his path to power would not be quite as unopposed as he first assumed. There was much more bloodshed and political intrigue yet to come before the fate of North Africa could be decided. I wanted to thank the community for participating in the polls which led us to this fascinating series, and to the patrons for helping to fund the channel. You can head on over there to catch script previews, vote on upcoming content, and download our art for each episode. A big shout out as well to the researchers, writers, and artists who made this episode possible. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.